When we turn on the news and hear about all the bad things happening all over the world, it can leave us with a sense of despair and anxiety about what the world is coming to. Thankfully, there are always people out there committed to making this world a better place. Some people write about injustice to raise awareness, some travel around the world giving aid and practical help to those unable to help themselves, whilst others strive to educate themselves and everyone else about important issues and what we can do to help. The woman we're going to be talking about today did all these things and more and was a brilliant example of how one person can touch so many lives. They say only the good die young, and that certainly is true in today's case. Trigger warning, we will be talking about eating disorders and suicide today, as I and Aaron from the Files Obscura podcast uncover the suspicious death of Jacky Sutton. Hello and welcome to the 19th episode of Uncover True Crime Podcast. My name is Stephanie, and each week we uncover a different unsolved true crime case, ranging from missing persons, unsolved murders, Jane and John Does, and suspicious deaths. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at uncover_pod and on Instagram at Uncover True Crime Pod. You can listen to the episodes on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube by searching Uncover True Crime. Today's episode is part of a collaboration with Files Obscura podcast, so welcome Aaron.
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Aaron, and I run the Files Obscura podcast with my team. We like to cover more, like your podcast, true crimes and unsolved murders and stuff. However, we try to err on the side of the mysterious or the just downright obscure stuff. So sometimes we won't just cover true crime. We will cover, very unique alien abduction cases, certain types of mental illnesses that would lead to certain true crimes. Or, as we did in one of our latest episodes, it was the Satagaya murders, which unfortunately, due to some issues, we could not have you, Steph, on for that episode. But in that episode, which you should be able to hear as of Tuesday, June 9th, we have talked about a family who, for all reasons, seemed like the perfect family in Japan, and they, with no warning, died in one night on the turn of the century. And to this day, 20 years later, we still don't know what happened.
That's crazy, isn't it? That
It's
a murder of an entire family can go unsolved for so long. Just how does someone do that and leave nothing?
Well, without spoiling too much about the episode, there's a lot of left turns and things that just don't make sense, and a lot of what I'll say are unintentional red herrings. Due to the description and the behavior of the suspect that people believe, it doesn't make sense how someone could leave so much evidence too that you'll learn when you listen to the episode, and still get away with things, because some evidence would lead people to suspect maybe there would be military personnel from America, specifically from Edwards Air Force Base, which, fun fact, was the Air Force Base that was right next to where I grew up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the idea of the person who killed this family, what you need to know is that they lived in a duplex. Family that lived right next to them was the mother's mother and her sister and husband at the time.
Oh,
So you have a family living literally one wall away, and nobody knows what happened.
that's absolutely heartbreaking.
Oh, yeah.
This episode is going out on Friday the 12th, so the Files Obscura podcast episode on that case will be available as you're listening to this. Highly suggest going to check it out. I know I will be, because it sounds like a really interesting case.
Absolutely. If anybody was interested, we are currently also available on Spotify, which is our biggest platform, and we are available on Anchor, which is where we get our second largest audience. And to get any more interactions with us, as we try to have our team be more involved with the community, you can also find us on Twitter and on Instagram. Or you can also join our Facebook page. We just launched the Facebook page about a day or two before, as of us recording now.
Go check them out. At some point, I will also be on their podcast discussing a case. I will let you know when that goes live, but please check out Aaron and his podcast. They are really, really good. I highly rate their content. So without any further ado, let's uncover the mysterious death of Jacky Sutton.
Jacqueline Sutton was born in Hertfordshire, England in 1964. There is not a lot of information publicly available about her family or her childhood, but we do know that even from a young age, she identified as a feminist and was passionate about how women were portrayed in the media. When she first read an issue of Jacky, a popular teen magazine back in the 60s and 70s, she was appalled by the messages it was sending to young women about makeup, boys, and body image. From that moment on, she insisted those around her call her Jacky, spelt with a Y, to distance herself from the publication as much as possible. By Jacky's own admission, she did not have a lot of aspirations growing up career-wise, and she did not like how the education system only seemed to value intelligence instead of perhaps athleticism and creativity. She finally seemed to fit her perfect fit when she was enrolled in a vegetarian boarding school at age 16. She felt extremely passionate about vegetarianism and veganism, and it was a lifestyle she would live by and promote for the rest of her life. At this school, she would also develop a love for literature, Shakespeare in particular, and she got accepted into Warwick University, where she studied English and American literature as well as Spanish. She graduated with a first degree and an overall grade so high she received personal recognition from the Cambridge Exam Board. Right after finishing university, she moved to Canada, where for 2 years she volunteered to help create houses for the Native and Indigenous communities and would later describe this part of her life as a magical time. She returned to the UK in 1989 and was awarded a scholarship to complete a master's degree in constitutional law. She wrote her thesis on Native Canadian land rights and got a distinction grade for this. She returned to Canada briefly and did consider a career in constitutional law, but as segregation was still in effect in South Africa at the time, she decided to become involved in the anti-apartheid movement and took a job with the Angolan embassy. She traveled the world working for the Vatican Radio, then to Eritrea in East Africa, where she worked for the BBC News World Service. She lived in Eritrea from 1993 to 1998, but spent 3 of these years in a detention center before finally being deported on suspicion that she was a spy. The trauma she experienced whilst in the detention center led her suffering from PTSD, and back in 1998, there was no real help for people who suffered from mental health issues. In an article she wrote for her Canberra, she said, "I was given some Prozac and told to soldier on." Upon her return to the United Kingdom, she was offered another scholarship to complete her PhD at Leeds University. But due to her mental health and her mother being diagnosed with breast cancer, she chose to care for her mother in her final days and postponed any future studies. This was not the first time Jacky had cared for someone who was dying, as during the 90s, she lost a friend to AIDS, a disease he contracted while he and Jacky worked together in Africa. Others were scared too to be around him, as little was known about AIDS, and people thought that being around someone who suffered from it would lead them to also contract the virus. This did not stop Jacky from comforting her friend and holding his hand through his final days. As she said, no one should die alone.
Despite the loss of her friend and mother, Jacky did indeed soldier on and would marry the love of her life, Charles, in 2000. Her family approved of him, but it was Charles's approval of America invading Iraq that would eventually split them up. Jacky was very against the Iraq War, and as they were both very politically minded and headstrong, this difference of opinion put a huge strain on their marriage and they divorced in 2004. The same year Jacky's father died after turning to alcohol following his wife's death. Jacky kept working through all her heartache and took great interest in the Middle East. She worked in Afghanistan, Ghana, and Iraq throughout the rest of her career, and in 2014 she started working as a deputy country head for the Institute of War and Peace Reporting. She felt very passionate about changing the anti-women narrative being spread by the Islamic State. WIPR's executive director Anthony Burden was more than happy to give Jacky the job, saying, quote, "She was the only person who could possibly step into Ammar's shoes and did it seamlessly," unquote. Jacky was very aware of how dangerous her job was, as her predecessor and friend Ammar al-Shabandar had died in a car bombing in May 2014. Jacky's friend Susan Hutchinson said, quote, "When she took up the job, she knew her predecessor had been killed. We knew it was a dangerous job in a dangerous country," unquote. Jacky commented on the dangerous nature of her work to her Cambria, saying, quote, "If ISIS wants to attack, they will, but it will take planning and I won't be the target. If the wacko wants to get to heaven, he or she will have to contend with armed guards and a choice of targets, and the same for criminal kidnappers, a growth industry in Iraq," unquote. When Jacky wasn't risking her life reporting on issues in the Middle East, she was enjoying the sunny beaches in Australia after moving there in 2013. She started working on her PhD at the Australian National University in Canberra and was making such amazing steps to make the world a better place for people in war-torn countries. When covering cases, I really like to tell you as much about the victim as possible, as it is not their death that defines them. I could carry on for hours telling you all about Jacky's accomplishments and the amazing work she did, and if you're interested in hearing about it, please check out the article she wrote for her Canberra magazine. As I was researching this, I couldn't help but think about all the amazing things she would have gone on to do. She managed to fit a lot into her 50 years, and we will never know what else she could have gone on to achieve, as she died under very mysterious circumstances on the 17th of October 2014.
A week before she died, Jacky traveled back to London to attend her friend Amar al-Shabandar's funeral. She caught up with her friends and family in what was described as, quote, emotional but ultimately uplifting week, unquote, on the 16th of October. She boarded flight TK 1986 from London to Istanbul, Turkey, where she would have to wait a couple of hours for her connecting flight to Erbil, Iraq. She arrived in Turkey at 10 p.m. local time and sat in a cafe, drinking a couple of beers and reading while waiting to board the plane. There is CCTV footage that shows her in the airport, and it seems as though she fell asleep as she did not respond when the final call for her flight was being announced. Upon realizing Jacky had missed her flight, her bags were taken off the plane and it took off. Jacky made her way to the check-in desk 15 minutes after the plane had left, and she was informed that she would have to buy another ticket. This is where accounts start to differ. Some sources claim that Jacky became terribly upset and told staff she didn't have enough money to buy another ticket, whilst others say that she had thousands of dollars on her, more than enough to fund another ticket. Although, even if she did not have money on her, it is agreed by all of her co-workers at IWPR that this sort of thing is not uncommon, and they would have paid for another ticket. Other sources say she did not ask about booking another flight, but was told she would have to go back to the main foyer and out the security exit, but there was not going to be another flight that night. Her friend and former colleague Sebastian Klitsch said, quote, that Jacky I know would either take the opportunity to have a night out in Istanbul or would start working on her next thesis chapter while waiting for another plane, unquote. Jacky did not buy another ticket, and instead she hung around the desk before entering the ladies' toilet at 1 a.m. 15 minutes passed and people entered and exited the toilet as normal. This was until 1:15 a.m. when 3 Russian women entered the bathroom and immediately came back out, alerting staff to the fact that they had just discovered the body of a woman. That woman would later be identified as being Jacky Sutton. Turkish authorities were quick to reveal that Jacky had hung herself with a bootlace from a hook on the bathroom door, but her family and friends were not convinced.
Everyone was shocked by Jacky's sudden passing, and several people and agencies Jacky had worked for expressed their disbelief and immense sadness over her death. Anthony Borden, the executive director of IWPR, said, quote, we at IWPR remain deeply saddened by Jacky's death, and our thoughts are with her family at this time. Jacky was an extremely kind, competent and dearly valued member of staff. Throughout her career, she courageously dedicated herself to improving the lives of disadvantaged and dispossessed in some of the world's most challenging regions, with special focus on strengthening media and freedom of expression. Jacky was one of the top development professionals working in Iraq, and she devoted nearly 10 years of her life to helping the country. She was extremely bright, highly competent, and well able to handle herself in difficult environments, and she was universally loved. We are all in shock, unquote. His statement was quickly followed by one from the International Women's Development Agency, a company that worked on women's rights and gender equality in the Asian Pacific region. They had this to say, quote, today we grieve for Jacky Sutton, a close and courageous colleague who IWDA worked with through the women, peace and security movement. Jacky Sutton was a fearless advocate for women's rights. Her passing brings home the risks women human rights defenders face every day. Today, we are angry and grieving for Jacky Sutton, Tomorrow we'll be seeking answers and calling for urgent action, unquote. No one that knew Jacky could comprehend that she would take her own life over an issue that could have been easily resolved, and they called for a full investigation into her death. Christian Bluer, a research fellow who was completing his PhD alongside Jacky, said this on Twitter, quote, Jacky Sutton worked in Afghanistan and Iraq. Toughest woman you could meet. Turkish police say she committed suicide because she missed her flight, unquote. Hiwa Osam, leading Iraq journalist, quickly followed suit, saying, quote, unless I see evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that Jacky Sutton committed suicide, I am convinced that she was killed. R.I.P. unquote. 4 days after her death, the IWPR and the Sutton family released a statement that said the Turkish authorities had, quote, cooperated fully and provided access to the complete dossier of evidence relating to the case, including copies of CCTV images and all documentation, unquote. They also stated that they had been provided with, quote, comprehensive CCTV footage with no apparent time gaps, still pictures, and witness statements that all indicate Jacky was alone and that there was no evidence of a struggle, unquote. But that, quote, there remains the possibility that additional information will come to light, unquote. They agreed with the Turkish authorities that she had completed suicide, and just like that, her case was closed. But that did not stop people speculating that there was more to the story. Before we go on to talk about the theories, I want to make it perfectly clear that we mean no disrespect to the Sutton family or their belief that Jacky died by her own hand. Everything we're going to discuss is pure speculation, and our thoughts are with them even now, years after Jacky's death. We hope they are doing okay and that the inquest that was conducted has given them closure as to what happened to her.
With all that being said, the first theory is that Jacky decided to commit suicide in an impulsive act resulting from the stress from her missing her flight. As mentioned earlier, this is what her family believed, and after the inquest into her death, her sister Jenny released the following statement on behalf of the Sutton family. Quote, the family is satisfied with the investigation undertaken by the Turkish authorities. We were deeply skeptical about the initial reports, but based on the evidence we have seen at this stage, we believe that Jacky acted alone. Unquote.
Okay, so this is the part where me and Aaron are going to discuss this particular theory that Jacky completed suicide. Aaron, what do you think about this theory?
I'm going to get a little bit more personal than I intended to here with suicide. As someone who has personally attempted on more than one occasion, I've always advocated to never go for that attempt because it's a very permanent solution. I'm sure we've all heard that rhetoric to a very temporary problem. And, you know, unfortunately, I have firsthand experience with what it's like to hang yourself. And I hate that I have that experience. But from what I see, the statement is that she hung herself with her bootlace on one of the bathroom hooks in the stalls. It doesn't sit right, because not only would you have more than enough weight to break a bootlace, but I'm sure, you know, as it is for me, when I go into those bathroom stalls, I don't know what it's like in other countries or other regions, even in the United States, but as far as I know, those hooks are, for me, chest level. And I'm 6'3", 6'4", or 195 centimeters. That's still, you know, even if you're 5'9" or whatever, you know, 5'5", that's still not tall enough for you to hang yourself. So in no way do I believe that's even conceivably possible. She would have had to hang herself by one of the ceiling lights or something, and even then, those don't hold the structural support to support a body even at 150 pounds or so.
I totally agree with everything that Aaron said. The actual act of her doing it, I don't understand how she physically could have completed suicide in the way that they're saying she did. I mean, I am 5'9", and I'm telling you, if I tried to hang myself on the back of one of those hooks, my feet are hitting the floor with plenty room to spare. If you're wanting to hang yourself, you're going to do it from a great height, because you're not going to want your feet to hit the floor. It sort of defeats the purpose. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, yeah, and even more so, if you're going to hang yourself, you know, and just me being just completely objective here about how this works, because I have a lot of friends who, you know, are very into dark subjects like this, one even wanting to be a mortician. I learned through discussion with them and stuff, through looking into other cases, a shoestring, like I said, or a bootstrap would not be enough. The tensile strength that would undergo would be more than enough for that to snap. Even belts can struggle doing that. It's leather belts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you would need something very heavy duty, you know, It's something that can withstand not only the weight, but the other issue with that is there's two ways to die by hanging. There is the very slow suffocation, and then there's the very quick drop that snaps your neck. When we think of hangings in criminal cases and stuff from a long time ago, that was the method that they would opt to. They would hang you, and then they would put you over a pedestal that would drop underneath you, and the weight of your body would be enough to yank on the rope on your neck, and it would break, killing you almost instantly. If you didn't die almost instantly and you sat there and just choked, or the blood was cut off from your brain, that was seen as you not have done your job right, because it's a very slow and agonizing death.
Yeah.
So when I imagine, I go then to strangulation. If there's enough evidence to say that, the cause of death was located around the neck, I immediately think strangulation, either by your hands or a garrote. If you don't know what that is, it's the, spy tool or Italian mafia tool, where you got a piece of piano wire or something, or that twine, and you wrap it around two, things to hold in your hand, and then you choke somebody that way. Done right, unfortunately, you can make it look like someone killed themselves that way, because the bruising would only be around the wire or the string that was used. And yes, a lot of people may talk about, her PTSD, which could lead to depression. I personally suffer from PTSD to a minor degree, and my mother, being a U.S. veteran, also suffers from PTSD. And I can tell you, yes, PTSD does lead to some suicidal thoughts, but more often than not, it can also lead to just anger issues. It can just lead to, being stubborn and taken as a bitch sometimes. Excuse my language, but, it doesn't always lead to suicide. And so when people use that as their smoking gun as a reason to explain this, which I saw some of my own independent research, I just couldn't be more appalled at the lack of understanding of what PTSD and suicide is. And when you, sit on that side of the argument, like I said, it just doesn't make sense. And coupled with the fact that there are more than enough cases of journalists that have been targeted, especially in regions with a lot of political discord, journalists are often always targeted because they're the ones spreading news to other countries. And they don't have any reason to, follow the ethics and journalistic styles of the country that they're in. They have no duty to that country to make them look good. They have a duty to report what they see and what they find out. And so oftentimes countries will kill, supposedly, they'll kill journalists and make up a story of them being missing in action, or killed by a terrorist group, or committed suicide to some degree, and there's more than enough cases that, don't make sense like this. Jacky is just, she's not the first. She's not the last. She's just one of many journalists that have suffered from this.
Totally agree with everything that Aaron says, and I'm sure we have all seen and heard on the news about different journalists who have either been abducted or sadly been killed purely for doing their job, and that is absolutely something we're going to get into in a theory a bit further down about the possibility that Jacky was murdered, which in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, I absolutely believe that is what happened. Going back to the PTSD point for just 2 seconds, I also have personal experience with PTSD. It's something that I still struggle to this day, and as much as I totally understand PTSD affects everyone differently, for me, I get very anxious by certain triggers. So if people come up behind me a bit too quickly, I live with my partner, and even if he comes out of the bathroom at a time when I'm not expecting it, he lives in the house and he has lived with me for, I want to say, around 7 months. I still get really freaked out by that, and it still gives me a lot of anxiety. So it is really, really hard to live with. But this is something that Jacky had dealt with for about 20 years by the time that she had died. And yes, she didn't receive professional help at the time when, she was detained and when the PTSD started. But 20, on one hand, yes, 20 years is a very long time to deal with mental illness without proper help. But at the same time, 20 years is a very long time to be able to manage your own triggers.
Learn how to build your safeguards and stuff like that. Yeah, because to kind of speak a bit about, what I deal with, I went through a very traumatic situation whenever I was about 15 years old with my mother. This is not the incident that gave her PTSD. Like I said, she was a veteran. She already had this. But this is the situation that gave it to me. It's 10 years on. I still, deal with it. I have built, my own kind of safeguards, but on my bad days, the worst it's ever gotten was, a series of nightmares and just pure paranoia, about being afraid about whoever I was talking to, everyone, and the need to escape was very real. The panic attacks I suffer and still suffer, are very real.
Yeah.
However, like I said, she had 20 years. I only had 10. And I've had time to build safeguards for myself, ways to get through this. I personally decided not to seek professional help about this, as unfortunately, I grew up in a household that prided your ability to get through things by yourself. And that is probably the most polite way I could say that. The common argument being just get over it. And I had to learn to live with that kind of environment. And, I learned through meditation and self discipline how to deal with this stuff, ourselves. And there's other practices and things that worked for individuals. And especially as a journalist, I can imagine she would have built this up a long time ago. So again, it doesn't stand to like, I can understand, moments where things would flare up and, you may get to a dark mental place. I just don't see that being likely with her.
Totally. Another thing, that incident with Jacky happened in the late 90s. Look at everything she went on to achieve after that. She immigrated to Australia. She went from Canada to Afghanistan to Ghana to Iraq. She was a frequent flyer. She was used to traveling. And she's going to kill herself over an incident at an airport. Like, I'm sure that during her life, she had experienced difficulties at airports before, either with, common things like the plane being delayed or, missing your flight, which, like, is what happened to her here. I can understand how it maybe triggered her, how it maybe could have made her anxious, because some reports do state she was upset, some say that she wasn't. I can understand how she would maybe be upset and a bit panicky for about 10 minutes. I'm sure most people would if they missed a flight and were stuck in Istanbul. But given how often she would fly from country to country, it doesn't make sense that that's what would make her make the decision to end her life. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it just doesn't fit. And important note, it's not just that she just traveled from country to country. She traveled to countries where there were, national issues still going on, like apartheid.
Absolutely.
Constant fighting that was still going on in the places that she was going to. So it's not like she was just investigating like a business firm in like China or something. She was going to places that dealt with issues that you're gonna have to, rely on your flight or fight response sometimes. You're gonna have to deal with issues that could very well be life or death sometimes.
Hmm.
Or what I like to call powder keg situations where it's a lot of tension, there's a lot of things, and it could take one minor mistake popping everything off. And I'm sure she probably dealt with situations like that quite regularly. So again, like you said, going through, Istanbul, getting into the airport and being told, you missed your flight, you need to buy a new ticket. Yeah, I could see her like you said, being triggered for a moment, but I could also see her just being like, okay, it's not a big deal, takes a few deep breaths, calm down, and then let's work this out. I see that being a lot more likely with her.
Absolutely, that's where I stand. I struggle with the logistics of how she actually apparently completed suicide. Obviously, it was 1:15 when those three Russian women went in and found her and came back out. But there was apparently people going in and out of that toilet, between 1 a.m. and 1:15. I don't understand how they found her so quickly. Because if she did indeed hang herself in a toilet cubicle, how did they find her within seconds of them entering the bathroom? I was thinking about this a lot earlier, and what seems most reasonable in my head, and I don't know if you'll agree with me here, Aaron, is that if she was murdered, someone strangled her with the bootlace, maybe not, whatever. If they killed her, if they positioned her body on the hook on the back of the door and then left the door open. But if she did intend to complete suicide, she's not going to do that with the door open. You're going to lock the door and do it in private because you're not going to want anyone to interrupt you and you're not going to want anyone to find you while you're trying to do that. What do you think? I just found that the fact that they found her so quickly doesn't sit right with me.
Okay, and this is going to be kind of a weird example that I'm going to, However, with what little we know, it's definitely under the umbrella of possibility. And I'm gonna ask you real quick, how familiar are you with the Marvel Netflix series Punisher?
Not at all.
Okay, so I'm gonna do my best to explain a very specific scene that you find in the first season, in the first episode actually. To kind of give you a brief rundown, the character Frank Castle is going on, basically a killing spree to kill every member associated with the gangs that killed his family. One of the Irish mobs that he was going after, he found a dude in a bathroom stall, and he went in there, closed the stall behind him, literally strangled him with his own necktie. But the people outside of the stall just thought that they were, a gay couple just doing what they needed to do in the stall. So, under an air of just complete possibility, although it's not something I would really say is something I support, what if there was an instance where the killer joined her in the stall and was able to silently kill her, but all the other women were able to kind of just, disregard it for whatever reason? Maybe it's a lesbian couple, maybe it's a mother and daughter, for whatever reason. They don't know, they just don't want to get involved. And she was quietly killed there. And then as soon as the killer left is whenever the three Russian women would enter and see the body at that point. That will explain why nobody was able to see it, nobody was able to suspect what happened, and we don't know who the killer is. But then that brings to the question, would, I haven't seen the CCTV footage. I can't say, one way or another, but it brings a question of, would the female assailant, assuming she's female, even be capable of that level of violence or strangulation? And if so, what is her motive? I mean, it still leaves other questions, but it was interesting that was the first thing that came to my mind, because it does, to a certain extent, seem almost plausible, you know?
Yeah, I totally hadn't considered the fact that there was someone else in the cubicle with her. It's hard to tell because obviously we don't, public
Yeah,
toilet.
we don't have cameras in our
No,
bathroom stall.
no, we
Thank
don't
God.
know even how big it was or if someone else could have fit in there. I do think that's a possibility. And something I was going to mention a bit earlier in terms of a man entering the toilet, and please excuse me if I get these terms wrong, but if he was perhaps wearing a burqa or a hijab, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, hijab, burqa.
Yeah, it's very possible that if you were going to disguise yourself and go into a toilet and want to be disguised on CCTV, I think that would be a pretty good way of doing it. And obviously, a burqa and a hijab would be very easy to come across in Turkey. I do.
Exactly, and there, coming from a military family and a lot of friends that I have in the military who have been overseas and everything, I've heard stories of terrorists who would try to hide that way. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility either. And sometimes they succeed. They don't know until it's a little too late. Sometimes, when you're escorting civilians and stuff like. And I'm not military personnel. I've never served, so if I get anything wrong, please forgive me. But as I imagine it, with the TV and personal experiences that I've had, told to me, you're not always going to be aware of that possibility. You're not always going to be aware of people's intentions either. You're just trying to do your job and move on and make sure you don't lose anybody. So the idea of somebody being able to sneak past other people, being disguised as a woman, especially whenever you're wearing some form of headgear that covers most of your face, it's going to be very easy to slip in and out of situations like this, especially if you're small enough to fit a kind of more feminine stature. You're not going to get me doing that. Like I said, I'm 6'4". I'm 195 centimeters. I am too big. I'm too hairy. It wouldn't work. But if you have somebody who's a little more like my brother, he's 5'7". He's only 122 pounds. He would make a much better, stand-in for this kind of hypothesis. And for me, assuming that it is a male in disguise makes a lot more sense with some of the other things I was talking about, rather than it being a female.
Do lean more on the side that she was murdered, absolutely. I want to balance out this argument slightly because there are a lot of people, including the Sutton family, who do believe that she committed suicide. So, as much as I and Aaron don't necessarily believe that this is what happened, I do want to balance this argument out slightly.
I believe that's fair.
So, while Jacky was a very smart and capable and strong woman, she had a lot going on beneath the surface that people didn't know about. Some people are very good at putting on a brave face, me being one of them. And when people are struggling with these issues and just putting on a brave face, it can often come as such a shock to their friends and family that, like what happened in Jacky's case, as I said, a lot of her friends were like, no, she would do this. But you never truly know what's going on inside a person's head. Jacky had actually suffered from anorexia when she was a teenager. I could only find one article that mentioned this, although it did seem to be a very credible article, and it didn't go into a lot of detail about how this affected her in her teenage years, or how it affected her in adulthood, or what treatment she received for it and everything. But from photos I can see of Jacky that are publicly available, she didn't at all seem to be underweight. She looked like she was a very healthy woman. To me personally, looking at the photos, she looked like someone who enjoyed walking a lot. She had quite, I don't know what you think, Aaron, if you've seen any photos of her, but she looked like she had a slight kind of muscular build.
Yeah, I saw some photos of her. From what I've seen and what I know about anorexia and just body dysmorphia in general, as it's a very big problem here in the States, still, it's not something I personally suffered, but something I was more aware of, I guess, on a personal level, from as of all places, a Netflix movie called To the Bone. It actually has Keanu Reeves as the doctor in that. It's a fantastic movie. I highly recommend it. But in that movie, the main character, she goes by Eli about halfway through the film, and that's just what she's addressed as. She has anorexia, and very bad anorexia. Like, she measures the width of her arm on an almost daily basis.
Oh.
And she's constantly running up and down stairs, constantly refusing to eat and stuff like that. If you imagine worst case scenario, this was Eli. It's not always to that degree, but the psychology of it is you'll never see yourself as great. And the idea of constantly exercising is still prevalent, like you said with Jacky. She did seem fit, she did seem toned, so that may be something she still carried on. Maybe she developed more self-control and was able to keep herself on a schedule. Maybe she was able to tell herself when to eat and what to eat to make sure she had her calories to keep doing her job. But the idea of being that strict on her body may still have been prevalent. Body dysmorphia is not something that goes away, very easily by any means. And sometimes it lasts with you for a lifetime. Like PTSD, it's a constant battle because you're constantly fighting the negative image of yourself that you can't shake off, no matter what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, I've personally have never dealt with anorexia. I have in the past had an eating disorder, but I've never actually had anorexia or body dysmorphia. Although I think that anorexia is a very misunderstood mental illness, because that's exactly what it is. It's a mental illness. You can't just look at somebody who's really, really underweight and be like, bam, anorexia. It is a mental illness. And in theory, you can be 18 stone plus, whatever, you can weigh whatever and still be anorexic, because it's a mindset. Anorexia is just often not picked up until you're scarily underweight. It's not picked up until you're at crisis point. But it's very possible that Jacky could still have had the mindset of someone with anorexia, even though she didn't appear to be underweight. I mean, as you said, Aaron, body dysmorphia is something that it can take years and years to get over, and I know that some people never truly get over it. You can't avoid your body, you can't. It's not something you could get away from. It's not something you can distract yourself from. It's the physical place that you live. When you get dressed every morning, when you're in the shower, all these things can be triggers, and looking at different parts of yourself and thinking, God, I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, I'm so unattractive. As I said, I don't actually have personal experience with anorexia. I'm purely going off of what I've heard about the illness. But those thoughts always stay with you. It doesn't matter if you're 8 stone, 18 stone, 80 stone, you know, so I don't think that we can rule out the possibility that she still struggled with that, even though photos of her did show her at what I would perceive as being a healthy weight.
Yeah. And to kind of just round off the topic of anorexia and body dysmorphia in general, um, like you said, it could take any form in anybody because it is a mental illness. The way that anorexia works, a very, very, quick summary, you mentally see yourself as overweight no matter your size. You could be as skinny as a literal twig and still see yourself as fat and disgusting and repulsive. There's also bulimia, which is a similar issue. The way that anorexia and bulimia are differentiated is the way that the individual tackles their weight loss. I believe bulimia, it's excessive exercise and dieting, whereas anorexia, it's the forced vomiting and the lack to eat or do anything. And as somebody who suffered a very minor form of body dysmorphia, I never had anorexia, I never had bulimia. Those were never my issues. My current issue now, I'm, a little overweight. I'm trying to work on my image, but my biggest issue is me feeling that I will never get rid of this weight no matter what I do. So I'm going to say, open book. I am not the person to ask about body dysmorphia or anorexia. It's just, this was my personal issue dealing with my body at the time. So, and it's still something that carries on today. Most people and friends that I talk to, I'm very happy. I'm very cheerful. I like to be a positive person. But these are still things that weigh in the back of my mind. When I go to the shower and, I get ready, I see myself in the mirror. Unfortunately, the first thing I see, is just my sheer size, Yes, I'm tall, but, still have, your weight spilling over your sides is an issue. For me, it's an issue, and I don't like it. But I feel like I'm trapped in a sense of I'm stuck with this. So I got to get used to it, which then makes me more depressed, because I'm not where I ideally want to be and stuff. And then you start with most mental illnesses, you start going into this kind of cycle. And cycles are very hard to break unless you know how to discipline yourself and get out of it, you know. So,
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, although both of us have our own experiences with, body dysmorphia or eating issues, neither of us are experts on anorexia, bulimia, or anything like that. The point that I think we are both trying to make is that it's very possible Jacky was still suffering with these thoughts and with these images of herself. And I think because she was such a capable and strong woman, when you have an image that you want other people to see of you, if you want people to see you're a strong-minded journalist, you're capable, you can take on the world, as I believe a lot of people felt about Jacky, it's very easy for people not to see what's beneath that. And it's very, very possible that she had other things going on. I mean, she told her sister, and this is a quote, she was in despair about the Middle East and she was having a real crisis of confidence about her own capability to make a difference. She talked about her loneliness. I think she took a snap decision to check out, unquote. Jacky left a will behind, which obviously our sister saw after she passed away. And in this will, Jacky left a letter that said in part, quote, I'm not in Australia because I don't love you all. I do. If I liked myself more, I'd spend more time with you, unquote. When I first read that, my heart broke for her. I just think that's so sad that because you're struggling with whatever you're struggling with mentally, that you feel you've got to distance yourself from your family because you don't like the person you've become. That really broke my heart when I read that.
yeah, and as someone who suffers from clinical depression, it's something I deal with on an everyday basis. And when I read that, unfortunately, it echoed a lot of the same sentiments to videos I've made before my attempts, to family and friends and stuff. And it hurts because it hurts more for me, I guess, in the sense that I know what it's like sitting in that position, writing that down, and the mindset you have to be in, when you feel like it doesn't matter anymore because after this it's irrelevant, after this nothing else will matter for me, this is the best thing I could do, and all these thoughts that fill your head, and And as always, I highly advocate, against suicide and getting, help for mental issues and depression and stuff like this. Because I talked about it in one of my other episodes where I went over some statistics about suicide, and especially being, a white male, we cover almost 70% of all suicides, not just male suicides, not just white suicides, of all suicides. White males make up 70% in America. And, being part of that demographic, it really hurts to see, and it really hurts more to be able to relate. I don't want to be able to relate to that. I don't want to know what that's like. It's not a desirable feeling, but it is one that I think is important to have at least some understanding of and be empathetic for, because it allows you, to understand that, no words are going to be able to pull you out of this. I understood that a long time ago. Words are not enough to pull you out of these feelings. You have to be capable of just letting yourself be there for that person, whatever they need you to be. Just someone to hug, someone to just cry, to vent, to be angry, because you got to understand, whatever they express to you, it's not towards you specifically, but more often than not, obviously, they just need an outlet, and they need to be able to trust you. And with a lot of my friends that go through this too, I try to be that outlet because I know what it's like. And every day, I may start to sink, and I have to pull myself out of that and remind myself, no, you've got too much going on in your life to just say no right now. You've got too many people here that are relying on you, who are hoping to do work with you, who want to see you aspire and grow to the things you want to do. And I have to constantly remind myself of that. And I'm sure this is something she went and did often too. And unfortunately, we don't always win. Sometimes the depression wins, and it's a tragedy. It truly is a tragedy, and I'm trying so hard not to cry right now. Oh
Oh,
God. But yes, it hurts, and it sucks, and it's sad, and there's nothing you feel like you can do sometimes. And this is why it's so important to talk about, the things you're feeling, and we need to be okay to talk about our feelings, especially as a male. We're told all the time, just tough it up, man up, and manning up is just shutting things away. And eventually you can't shove things away anymore. There's not enough room. It's going to burst out, and it's going to be at the worst time, and it's going to make you feel even worse about yourself. So you have to learn to put faith in people and talk to them, but find the right person to talk to.
absolutely. I couldn't agree with everything that you've just said more.
Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now. Sorry.
I would just like to add at this point in the podcast that if you have any suicidal thoughts, please seek help. I will put resources and hotlines and whatever you need in the description below. And I say this from the bottom of my heart. If anyone listening to this podcast today has any thoughts on ending their own life and they need someone to talk to who they don't know, who isn't going to judge them, please head over to my Instagram page. Anything you say to me is confidential. If you need anybody, I'm here for you. Thank you for opening up about that, Anne. I know that couldn't have been easy.
It's never easy to talk about, but like I said, I try to be a very, outspoken advocate about mental health and men's health, because it's not like women's issues aren't important. They are absolutely important, but that shouldn't overshadow what men do go through. Uh,
No.
I have more than enough understanding friends, and I love them, and I'm proud of them for supporting me in the things I do talk about. Unfortunately, I've also had people in my life who thought I was being an asshole, that I was being very anti-feminist, because of the way I describe things or stuff. And I'm like, no, I'm fully well aware of the things that women go through, from the minor things of being catcalled to, the major things like female genital mutilation. I'm very aware of the systematic, displacement of wealth and resources that women do go through. I'm painfully aware of it, and it's things I think about all the time. Because as a human, I like to think of things like this: when you take away pronouns and you take away, adjectives, in the end, whoever you talk about, whatever you talk about, they should be equal. And not to make it too political with the things that are going on now in America. But like when it comes to race, especially, that is a very big issue, especially in the Black community, Because once you see that descriptor, unfortunately, a lot of, Americans were raised in an environment that bred systematic hate. And I was lucky enough to say I wasn't raised in that kind of environment. I was raised in an environment where that's a person. You treat them as a person. They can do good in society if you do good for them. And that's how I've ever seen it. Like I cannot see it as anything else. You being black, white, Asian, male, female, transgender,
Yeah.
it means nothing to me. It truly means nothing to me. And I wish more people could work that way.
So do I. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all just people, and we all deserve to be equal.
We deserve love, kindness, sweetness, compassion from everyone.
Yeah. I know, and it's so sad to me that some people don't get those things and they don't feel that compassion and that love, as you said, and that they feel that their only way out is by completing suicide, and that just makes me so sad. And going back to what you were saying about men committing suicide, that is also a massive problem in the UK. I think I read a statistic that said 87 men complete suicide in the UK every week. Yeah, we've got a huge issue because, again, that culture of man up, get over it, real men don't cry. Like, it's,
Yeah, pump it out and all that. It is so much more
I
destructive than people
know, and
realize.
people just expect that, women can talk to their girlfriends, and because we appear on the outside to be more emotional, we can open up more because it's almost like it's expected of us.
It's socially acceptable, and it's,
Yeah,
like you said, for women to be more emotional, where men are almost designed, if you will, to be more stoic and quiet and reserved. And I was sitting here trying to remember an episode that we did recently about suicide. One of our last episodes, Gloomy Sunday, was a Hungarian suicide song, came out in the 30s, during the one of the worst economic depressions that ever hit the world and everything. And we discussed, suicides and stuff and some of the statistics. And here in America, it's like 135 people die every single day to
that's
suicide.
awful.
Every single day. That's like, I think I did the math. It's like one almost every like 5 minutes or something. And I cover a lot more statistics and facts in that episode. So if you're curious and interested in the song too, because the history of the song is very, very dark, but almost gravitating. I don't know the right word for that. But it's definitely worth a listen to. And for any Americans that are listening, I also tell you there, some of the hotlines and places that you can call and text for help. There's always somebody out there for you. There's always someone who wants to see you tomorrow. Never forget that.
Absolutely. So I think as far as suicide goes, I think we've covered that really quite in depth.
Yeah,
Um,
we
yeah, we went quite deep. We went quite deep into that.
yeah. Sorry.
The second theory was that she completed suicide, but that there was something else going on besides her missing her flight, that there was something deeper to it. And this is a really hard theory to explore because, as we've just spoke about, everyone has got things going on. Everyone has got, issues that they may be not talking about or just something going on. But specifically, when I thought about this theory, I was thinking, did something happen to her at the airport that we don't know about? Did someone threaten her or say something to her that made her fearful? As Aaron said earlier, in order for her to get another ticket, she would have had to have gone out the security exit and then returned to the main foyer. I just have it in the back of my head that, did she maybe think that someone was waiting for her, or did she have another reason not to want to go back to that foyer? There is a lot of security in airports, so I really didn't know what to think about this one. But Aaron, I'm interested in what your take on that is.
Well, you call this one a theory, and I'm hesitant to say theory because there's nothing too concrete as
Yeah,
evidence or circumstance. So I would call this more of conjecture because of the amount of possibilities. So one possibility could be like, yes, of course, she was just going through mental illness and just she snapped and she lost to herself. That's possible. Then there's possibilities of maybe she knew something, and there was an event that she witnessed, somebody that she saw, and knew that this was going to be the end. Maybe she was the type of person to say that she's going to die by her
Maybe.
own hands, which in a way, you could argue is actually quite brave. Um, but for me, a lot of things in my personal life and personal opinions, I always say is circumstantial. So, take that one with a grain of salt. That one's purely from me, but it could also be, a situation where things were looking normal, and then maybe something she was digging up or looking into, it could be the Turkish authorities or whoever authorities, may have been tracking her for a while. And this is where they were just able to corner her. It could be something she digged up, but wasn't ready to reveal to the world. It leads too many possibilities of what could happen. This is where people's minds begin to wander and conspiracy theories begin to really sprout up. It's like, because a lot of people want to always go to the question, what did she
Yeah.
find? And of course, that's one of the first things I like to go to is, what did she find? Because yes, it makes for a much better story, but at the same time, it also leads the possibility of, political espionage, spies, political assassins and stuff like that. But then,
Yeah, you can literally get anywhere with that train of thought, eh?
but at the same time, then you start feeling like you're writing a B-rated, James Bond film at that point. So it's hard to really say, what's happened without finding out more. Maybe there was something that she found, maybe there wasn't. Maybe she lost to her own demons, maybe she didn't. I'm just not the guy to say.
Totally agree. And as I said earlier, everything that we've discussed in terms of how Jacky died and why, absolutely pure speculation. I personally just struggle with the fact that she killed herself purely because she missed a flight. So that's where my kind of thought came in was, is there something else going on at that airport that we don't know about? And that leads us into our third theory.
The third theory is that she was murdered, something that many of her friends and colleagues believe despite the official ruling. She was used to dealing with difficult situations and working in war-torn countries, so why would she choose to take her own life over something like missing a flight? Fellow Iraqi journalist Mazin Elias said, quote, "She continued in Iraq. Everything was difficult, everything was a challenge, but she still continued. But what I am sure about the kind of person that Jacky was, it's impossible she would have killed herself. Impossible. She is really looking for a better life for everyone. So why kill herself? That is crazy. I'm really sad and sorry for what happened. But if someone tells me she killed herself, I tell them, no, that's wrong. Someone killed Jacky." Unquote.
Even Anthony Borden, whose company released a statement saying that they believe she completed suicide, even he said, quote, "I said it's a crime. That was my immediate reaction, and I think everyone felt the same," unquote. Now, I don't know if he still holds that opinion, and he was very careful in the way he said this. He said crime. He didn't specifically say murder. What are your thoughts, Aaron, on within the theory that she was murdered? What initially comes to your mind about who could have had reason to want to kill her?
For me, the first and most probable case is always some government official. It could have been because a lot of people, whenever I was looking at this, some people speculate, some personal ISIS soldier or something like that. I'm like, they aren't skilled enough for that, in my opinion. It would take them, their tactics usually require massive amount of force, or guerrilla warfare tactics such as IEDs and stuff like that. They don't carry out political assassinations. They don't just straight up kill journalists, and be secretive about it. They usually film it. They usually document it and make sure the world knows they did this. That is
Yeah.
why they're a terrorist group. They own what they do. They want the world to know what they're doing. So, like I said, this to me screams something political. This screams to me some political official doesn't like what she was digging up and couldn't think of a better way to end her, or at least a quicker way to put a stop to her. In movies and TV shows and stuff, you deal with, back and forth kind of mental chess games. You deal with bargaining chips, you deal with being bribed all the time and all that. It's like a trolley problem situation where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So which choice do you have, kind of deal. For me, I think it most likely would probably be some Iraqi official, as that's where I saw most of her work being done. I don't see anybody from Africa targeting her, so many odd years later. I don't see it being a terrorist group. I don't see it being Turkey either, because I didn't see too much, related to her in Turkey specifically. Although there are some other journalist cases that did involve journalists, commenting on Turkey's government and stuff, and they would later be found dead in unexplainable circumstances. So I won't completely discount Turkey. However, it for me doesn't sit well. It just doesn't feel like that's the right answer.
From what I was able to find, I don't know if she did any work in Turkey. If she did, I couldn't find it documented anywhere. So I agree with you in that sense that I'm sure there are a lot of other people, maybe from Iraq or other places that she worked, that had an issue with the message she was trying to send. Jacky's friend Sarah said, quote, "A lot of people would have hated her, really hated her for what she was doing. She would have had a lot of enemies," unquote. And then another friend, Susan, said, quote, "A bunch of people might have liked Jacky silenced. There is a very strong history of Turkish police at the airport being violent who they perceive as being pro-Kurdish," unquote. This probably counteracts what we said about someone from Turkey having a hand in her death, but I found this statement to be really quite interesting because I don't know if she's trying to imply that staff at the airport has something to do with her death. And I read somewhere, I can't exactly remember where, but I did read somewhere that part of the reason her death was such a shock is that Iraq was way more dangerous than the airport in Istanbul. And if anything, some of them even said they felt safe in that airport. So I'm not entirely sure what she meant by this statement, or why she perhaps she doesn't say it outright, but is perhaps maybe implying that staff at the airport had something to do with it, or at least were nasty to her. That quote really came out of the blue when I was researching this case.
Yes, and something interesting that just came to mind. A lot of Muslim countries, have varying degrees of tolerance, especially when it comes to the difference between genders. She being a very headstrong female, journalist, reporting in a lot of these Arabic countries and Muslim-dominant countries. Obviously, that a lot of men may feel threatened by that. But here's an interesting thing that I was thinking of playing in my head was, she was found, she walked into the female bathroom. And obviously, there's CCTV footage of a bunch of women going in and out. And then eventually the 3 Russian women came in and, they reported her dead. Not once do you see a man go in there. And I don't see it being possible, pulling some Mission Impossible stunt going through, in between the ceilings or anything like that, obviously. So then it brings the question of, if the killer was female, possibly, what does that mean for the country that is responsible? Because I still believe it is some country or government agency that's behind it. But I don't necessarily see them using, females for such a job. Because most of the cases that I've read about people disappearing or being found dead, they're found dead in their hotel rooms in strange circumstances, or they're found dead in their cars or in alleys or something. But in a female bathroom, that just makes me ask the question, if the killer is a female, what does that mean in terms of possibility, to what happened to Jacky? I don't know. I just think it's something worth thinking about.
That's really interesting, and I actually hadn't considered that before. I mean, yeah, she was found in a female bathroom, so it would have been quite, even at 1 o'clock in the morning, which is when she went in, I think it would be quite hard to believe that a man would enter the bathroom, kill her, and leave without being seen, whereas a woman could have done that way easier. So I think that's really, really interesting. As far as why would a woman do that, one of the things that went through my head when I was thinking about the theory that she was possibly murdered, if she was murdered, I think we can all safely assume it was due to her journalism and what she was writing. I don't believe for a second that it was a personal motive, because I don't understand why they would follow her to Turkey if that was their motive. But as far as a woman killing her in that bathroom, do you think it was maybe someone who just really had strong opinions about what she was writing? And while she did write a lot about, trying to counteract the anti-women narrative by ISIS, sadly, a lot of women that live in these countries have been brainwashed, and that's this narrative that ISIS and everyone in history in these countries has written. These women genuinely believe that is their worth, that they don't have as many rights as men, or that they are somehow inferior to men.
Or it's their God-given role to be subservient or be in this position in society, and so on and whatnot. Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm used to hearing that rhetoric too, because I do have a lot of Muslim friends. Some who are a little more conservative, some who are a little a little liberal, who don't stick as true to their teachings and stuff. And so I've had various opinions and various outlooks on this and stuff. Also, real quick, because I know it's going to come up to people, saying, "Oh, what if it was just a really small-figured man who dressed up as a woman?" I mean, it's possible, yes, because men are more likely to physically kill someone, whereas women traditionally use something else, such as poison,
Yeah.
be a little more indirect. That idea just doesn't sit right with me. But at the same time, like you said, just the idea of a radical woman, just being so enthralled and emotional to just kill, Jacky, like we said, she was physically fit. She had a figure that could withstand a lot a lot of activity. So if someone was just that emotionally charged just to strangle her or kill her, I would imagine it would cause a lot of commotion, cause a lot of noise. So I don't see that being as
Yeah.
possible. Um, so like I said, there's too many things that are kind of up in the air to say one way or another. I personally don't think it's somebody too emotionally charged, if you will, to have done something like this. Because when people are emotional, people get physically violent, and they aren't, they don't think things through. So to have, a death be covered up like this, and to this day, still be ruled a suicide, if it was somebody who was just, angry for one reason or another like this, I don't think they would be very likely to have been able to pull this off.
I totally agree with everything that you said, and I think that that's a really, really good point. I think that if it was a woman who did really strongly disagree with the things that Jacky was writing about and putting out there, they probably would have caused some commotion first, like maybe shouted at her or, said mean things to her. But there is 45 minutes of time unaccounted for between 12:15 when she found out she missed her flight to 1 o'clock, and we don't know what happened in that time. Nothing might have happened in that time. Maybe she just sat and wondered, oh God, what am I going to do now? It's 1:15 or whatever. Any number of things could have happened in that time. But without knowing that, I think it's really hard to come up with any sort of concrete theory that's not going to sound almost like a conspiracy. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, something that it's not like a solid theory or motive. You're diving into tinfoil territory there.
Absolutely. And when I put across theories in my episodes, I really like them to be theories that's either based on fact or something that is reasonable.
Some sense of reason. Yeah, some sense of reason that it makes sense. It's just not pulled out of your ass somewhere.
Absolutely. And with this case, it's really hard to come up with theories as to who could have killed her because there is so little known about what happened in that airport after she missed her flight. And although I think, as I said earlier, I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that if she was murdered, she was probably murdered by someone who took exception to the things that she was writing and the activism and the things that she was doing in Iraq. I think we can all reasonably, well, at least I can reasonably assume that that would have been the motive.
Yeah, that is something I can definitely agree with you on.
It's really difficult with this case because I often find that when we have such little evidence, there's so many theories. This case, there's so much about Jacky's life, which I'm so grateful for. I feel sad that I had to learn about Jacky and all her accomplishments under these circumstances, but I'm so thankful that there's so much online about what an amazing person she was and all the things
Absolutely.
that she did throughout her life. Almost nothing about how she died and that could really narrow down what happened to her. And In a way, I understand it because officially her death has been ruled as suicide, so why would there be? And obviously, out of respect for her family, as I hate to say it, but if she was murdered, I don't know if we're ever going to find out what really happened.
Yeah, and you know, I share with you in that sentiment. I just sometimes there are cases that are either too old, too well planned out, or just the circumstances just make it impossible to find out. And especially whenever you have political agendas involved, which may have been a possibility here. You know, even though it's pure speculation, I feel like this may be unfortunately one of those circumstances, one of those cases where we're just never going to get the answer unless someone comes out and says so, you know, or unless there is, you know, that smoking gun that definitively says that yes, she committed suicide. We may not know why, but she did. Until we get one of those two options, you know, we're never going to know, and we're going to be left to speculate and dream up all these possibilities and scenarios of what could happen. But it's not going to get us answers. It's not going to get us, you know, evidence. You know, we're not going to get a confession that way. It's not going to amount to much of anything, you know. And that's for me the real tragedy, is that we don't even know the truth. We can speculate the truth all we want, but we won't know it.
And again, just to round off this part of the episode, our thoughts really do go out to the Sutton family. I'm so sorry for your loss. We're thinking of you, and nothing that we've said in this episode was meant to cause you any hurt or
Absolutely.
disrespect. And as I said earlier, if you have struggled with any suicidal thoughts, please see the description of this episode. There will be helplines and resources available. Whatever you believed about how she died or why, we are left with more questions than answers, although one thing that cannot be questioned is the legacy that Jacky left behind. She cared for people who were unable to care for themselves. She loved animals, and she gave home to pets that would have been discarded otherwise. She risked her life to give a voice to women in the Middle East who are constantly being oppressed by out-of-date laws, the culture that they live in, and by terrorist groups who want to silence those who they see as a threat. Jacky was smart, loving, and I believe inspirational. She would have gone on to do amazing things, and I think we could all learn something from her life and her bravery. All photos and sources related to this case can be found on our website at www.uncovertruecrimepodcast.co.uk. Please remember to follow the podcast on Twitter at uncover_pod and on Instagram at uncovertruecrimepod. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me here today on this episode. Do you want to just reiterate where listeners can find you and your podcast?
Absolutely. Thank you. Once again, yes, I am the owner and co-host of Files Obscura. You can find us on Spotify and Anchor. However, we are also on other platforms such as Stitcher, Google Podcast, and a few other ones that don't come to mind at the moment. To be up to date with all of our, you know, notifications and possible updates and collaborations, you can go ahead and follow us on Twitter or at Instagram, both at Files Obscura. And definitely check out the community over at our Facebook page, same name, Files Obscura.
Thank you very much, Aaron. As I said earlier, I will be on an episode of the Files Obscura podcast. I will let you know when that comes out. That's everything I have for you today. Thank you for listening till the very end. Please stay safe and have a good night.